and welcome to day 24 of our Cloud Run series. Today we are looking at Google Cloud's observability and how we can use that with Cloud Run. So we are going to look at tracing, we are going to look at logging, and we are going to look at monitoring, right? Because we don't just deploy our applications, but we want to make sure that if there is an issue, we can be able to find out what caused the issue, and we can be able to even put in measures to prevent that issue or to catch that issue early through something like, let's say, alerts. Now, what I have here is a very simple Python application that has different endpoints that would allow us to test out these features. One of the things I'd like to mention is let's take a look at logging, right? Now, when it comes to logging on Google Cloud, basically, if you take your Cloud Run service, anything you print out to standard out will go to your Google Cloud login. So it will appear in your logs, the logs of your application. So that is good. You can just do a print or an echo or a console.log and it will just show up in your logs. But that is sometimes not very useful because you do not have any idea about that log, and you maybe just have something like, let's just say, fail to init in Firestore, right? Is this an error? What kind of request caused this issue? Is there some way you wanted to trace the request, right? You would have to put all of that information, including the error information, inside that single string. So one way you can go about this is, instead of using text payload, you can instead use a JSON payload. So that means that you create JSON from your errors. You basically create a JSON and then you can use that on Google Cloud Login. That allows you to get more insight into your application. So in our situation, what I'm doing is I'm using the Python JSON logger, right? And then I'm using that to basically create a JSON formatter. And then, so we are using the default Python login, we are setting the stream to our system standard out. And then we are creating a formatter using the Python JSON formatter, right? So this then allows us to be able to kind of combine different attributes. When each time we are creating a new log, we can then combine these attributes, which will then appear neatly on our cloud login, which I will just show in a bit. So we set that formatter and then we say our default should just be info, right? And so anytime we want to log, and as an example here, when we go to the home page, we just log some text and then we just say, okay, the component is traffic and then some trace ID. Now, this trace ID, what I'm doing is that by default, once you have your application on Cloud Run and you have enabled Google Cloud Trace, basically what will happen is that you will get this header right here, right? I think even if you have not enabled Google Cloud Trace, you should still have this header. So when Cloud Run sends a response from your application, it would include this header. So you can then take this header and then get the trace ID from it and use that as a way to track that particular request, right? When we come to cloud tracing, we'll talk about the trace IDs a little bit, but you can use that to then track your requests. So you can think of it like some kind of a login ID or some way to basically say, okay, anything that has this trace ID kind of belongs to the same request, because the trace IDs will be different for each request. So you're able to track a particular request in your logs. And so we just put that also inside our login, right? So let's just launch the application to test this out. So we will just open the application. Right. Now, if you want to view your logs, there are, of course, separate ways you can see that. Let me just show the CloudTrace header just simply from here. So if you come to the network and then you click on the open tab, you should be able to see that in the response headers, you have x-CloudTrace- context. I didn't set this header myself. Google Cloud automatically sets it for us. So we are able to use that to trace this particular request on CloudTrace. If I refresh again, I should be able to see that, I now have a different trace. So for this particular request, the trace is different from the previous one. Now, if we wanted to see the logs, we can straight out just go to our logs, and we should be able to see any logs from here, right? But this is kind of like Google Cloud trying to make it easy for us to access things. If you want more detailed context, it's always best to just open this in the Log Explorer so that you can see more information about your logs, right? So let's just wait for a bit and we should see some further information about the logs. So because we clicked on view the logs in Log Explorer from here, Google Cloud has already populated our log query with some parameters about our Cloud Run service, right? And so we have the resource type being Cloud Run Revision, we have the resource labels, and then the service name being our Cloud Run service name, and then we have the location. So this now becomes a way for us to easily filter out the queries that are, or the logs that are for our service. So if we run it, we should then be able to see only logs for our service, right? Should be able to see the logs for our service right here. And let's now look at any of the logs. So you can see that when we visit the home page, we just have this log right here. So you can see the message being recorded here. Now, when I click on it, I should then be able to see that there is a JSON payload, right? And I can see that the component on it is traffic, the level name is info, and the message is this, and then we also have the trace ID, right? So this allows us to be able to further filter out our logs because we are not just using some text payload. If we are using a text payload, then you would have to search for some particular text. But since we are using JSON, I can then be able to do something like, okay, I want something whereby the JSON payload component, let's just say traffic, right? So JSON payload component is equal to traffic. So I'm going to run this query. And now you can see that I'm only seeing the request whereby the JSON payload is the root endpoint code, right? Because the JSON payload component is basically traffic, right? So this is allowing me to do more filters. If I look at the default, you should see here that if I look at the default, then I will now see that there's a bunch of logs, some of them even from Cloud Run starting the container and stuff like that, right? But if I go ahead to just have everything in JSON, then I can now do further um, further filters through my logs to find out the various logs that are here. Now, another log I'd like to try is let us visit the cached endpoint, the cached config endpoint. So what this does is basically the first time you visit it, it will look at this global variable. If there's nothing in it, then it will save this inside it so that the next time you visit it, it will just fetch, it will just rather load from the cache, because in your Cloud Run container, unless you are basically visiting a new instance of your Cloud Run service, you will still be using the same container, right? So you will be able to maintain any global cache that you have, at least till that container is destroyed, right? So we are able to have that. So if we come here now and then, let's say whereby the JSON payload, the component is cache. So if we check that particular request path here, we should be able to see, I think it's up here. Let's see. Why am I missing this? Yeah, cache config, right? We should be able to see that if there is no cache, we should have a cache miss. But then after that, if there is the cache, that means we have already stored something inside it. Then we should see a cache hit. So let's now look, but you can see here that the component is cache, right? Now this component variable, you can change it to anything that you want. It's just for the purpose of this testing that the name is component, but you can change it to anything you want that is reasonable for you. So now you can see that, let's look at the time now, right? I had previous tests, so that's why you can see this up here. But you look at the time now, you can see that there was a cache miss at this time, and then also there was a cache hit. So if I visit it maybe several times now, 3, 4, 5 more times, and then I run the query again to get some latest information, or I just refresh a little, it sometimes take a few seconds for you to see the new. Let's see. Okay, so you can now see. So it started from, I think, 00, right? The time 00, you see a cache miss, and then after that, cache hit, cache hit, cache hit, because all of the requests are still going to the same container. But you can see how by using JSON, we are able to create and we're able to craft these different queries, right? So just a second. I'm just looking for, yeah. So by using these queries, we are able to filter our logs instead of having to rummage and go through our logs to find out, where, whoa, to find out where what exactly went wrong, and to find out the information that we need. We can use this as a means to kind of categorize our logs. Now, I want us to look at CloudTrace. Right, so this is just an intro to cloud logging. There is more about cloud logging. You can check the documentation for more, but for your day-to-day, cloud run services, understanding this and being able to write different queries to filter out your logs is useful in this manner. You can even filter out something like, I'm guessing, yeah. So the prototypes with HTTP request method and stuff like that, you can do the filters for those. Now, when it comes to CloudTrace, CloudTrace is basically trying to help us to determine the latency in our application. So if we are making some requests, and let's just say in our application we are making multiple of them, right? What are the causes of some of the requests, right? What are the causes of our endpoint returning a bit more slower? How do we determine that? And that is where CloudTrace comes in. So it basically takes your request and it allows you to be able to see separate or individual operations and how long each one of them took. So you can then use that information to better make changes to your application code or tune your service if needed. So what we want to do is we will go to CloudTrace. So one of the easiest ways is we can just get a trace ID from here and then use that. But what I want us to do is I want us to visit an endpoint called slow trace. So what this endpoint does is it will first do just a sleep of like 2 seconds. Excuse me. It will then perform a database operation and then another sleep of like another 2 seconds. So you can see that the request is taking around 4 seconds to complete, just so we can have that in CloudTrace and then we can be able to just see how it works, right? So you can see the code right here. Let me just open that again because it can take some few seconds before you see the traces appear on CloudTrace. So if we look for slow trace, you can see it here. It's just sleeping, making a database query, and then just sleeping. That is all it does. So if we come here, now we come to CloudTrace, you can see the various traces that have been recorded. We can look at the last 1 hour. Excuse me. Yeah, so that's what I'm saying. It might take just a bit of time for the various or the new traces to just show up. We can just try once more just to get some data available there, right? Although I do have some previous ones, I just want to see if I can see the current or most recent trace. Okay, I can see it here. Right, so you can see some of these requests right here. So the spans basically represent individual operations, right? So what are some of the individual operations that are kind of like taking that amount of time, right? So you can check one of them here, right? So it's telling you basically, this is the trace, and you can see the trace ID, right? We came to the endpoint here, right? So this probably from the load balancer, and then finally we reach the service or the app server, and so we reach this host, right? And then this is where we took around 4.06 seconds. So the request came in, we took around 4.06 seconds inside the service, and then we kind of returned the response, right? So this is useful for you to then be able to tell the latency across your application. So this is basically automatic traces that Cloud Run creates for you. So Google Cloud with Cloud Run creates automatic traces for you that just shows you the latency of your application. So right now I can see that okay, this particular request is taking around 4 seconds, right? And so the something lying inside my application is responsible for this 4 seconds, right? And it's up to me to now investigate it. Now, if you wanted a bit more manual instrumentation of your traces, then that means that let's just say you want to see, is it the database query that is delaying you? Is it maybe another different type of operation that is delaying you, right? There might be some Google services that Google Cloud might automatically record their spans, right? But you will not be able to get the spans for everything that you do. And so in those cases, if you want to manually track certain spans or certain individual operations, then you can go ahead to use either something like OpenTelemetry SDK, right? Where Google Cloud kind of gives you even examples here, right? That you can use with like Go, Java, Node, Python. So you can use these, which would then allow you to be able to instrument certain requests. So if we even try the Python example, just to see Python instrumentation sample, I'm just trying to see if they show the code. Right, so this sets up the open telemetry, right? Just a few metrics about it. Yeah, the JSON formatter is set up some form of structured login with the JSON formatter. The sample application, so it sets up telemetry, and then Flask, you instrument the application. Let's see. Yep. So the app has two endpoints, right? So it sets up two endpoints. Yeah, and you are able to view the telemetry about the application, and you're able to also view the various traces, right? I'm sure you should also be able to track individual spans or individual requests, right? But I haven't really integrated the open telemetry to be able to tell what are all of the possibilities, right? But it's something that once you know about it, then you can go ahead to further use it in your application. And I'm sure you should be able to track even operation by operation level. I'm just not sure what kind of addition or improvement it will do if you just do the setup by default without instrumenting specific tasks. But you would have to go in to kind of find out a bit more on some of the things that it is able to do for you. I think this I made a mistake. I wanted to write something like, yeah, but it's fine. Let's see. Yeah. So you are able to view this information about your application and then the requests coming through, right? And because of our login, right? So let's just try. I think the slow request also has its own component. So let's just say trace demo, right? Let's just say that. So we can then change the component to trace demo, and then we can run the query once more, and we can pick up any of them, and then we can just pick up the trace ID. And you can come to CloudTrace. Let's just search by the last hour, and then we search for the trace, and then we put in our trace. Okay. Yeah, I'm thinking, let's see. Let's say last 15 minutes, something like that. I don't know if, okay. So let's just try again. Last 1 hour. Yep. Trace ID. Sometimes it takes a bit of time before the trace appears. So let's just try one that is just a few minutes above the current one. Let's just try this one. Let's just try this one. Okay. Let's see. Yeah, so this it just takes sometimes a few seconds for the trace to appear. So sometimes you might not see it immediately. So you see this trace right here, and then if I come to the request and now see, this is our span, which is kind of our request latency, right? But we just do not have more information about the individual actions. So maybe is it my API request that is the one responsible for this, or is it maybe my database operation or something like that. At the moment, we have not really instrumented open telemetry, so we don't have much. What we have is just the request latency, right? Which is enough for this demo purpose. But if you wanted to do more, then you can go ahead to use the Google Cloud Open Telemetry integration and then try to integrate a bit more of instrumentation to allow you to do manual tracking of certain processes. Now, now I want us to look at how we can handle errors and reporting, right? So let's just visit another endpoint. This is going to be the flaky endpoint. So we are going to visit a couple of times. It is just an endpoint that, based on a random choice, it will either display an error or it will display an actual page. So we have just a few of them, right? And then let's just look for the route right here. Here's just a flaky. What I want is just the name of the component so that in our cloud login we can pick it up, right? Okay. So in our cloud login, we can then trace that to the ones with a component of this. You can do that search, and you can now see that we have different types. So you can see some here, which is 0033, which is like random chaos monkey struck, random chaos monkey struck. So this is it. So if we do go ahead to face an error, then that is when we actually have this component. Now, what we can do then is, if we face this kind of error, maybe we want to send ourselves an alert, maybe we want to send ourselves a message on Slack, right? So what we can do is, anytime we receive this particular type of message, we want to send ourselves an alert so that we will respond to it. So we can go ahead, once we have put in our metrics, we have run our query, and we are sure that this is the metric that we want, and we don't have any other parameters to add to it. We can go ahead to just click on the actions here, and then we just say create a log alert, right? So we can give it a name. So that means that chaos, let's just say chaos monkey triggered. And then you can determine what is the severity. So that means that when this log comes in, how do you want it to kind of be prioritized? So for now, it is not an error for us. This is just testing. So we just said this is a warning. And then you can add some optional documentation, which kind of like would inform you about this particular issue. And so once you see it in your mail, you will not guess, okay, what is this about? But you will have maybe just a very small guideline on the next steps to take. So you can have maybe just some next steps, right? Um, Sleep and do nothing. Of course, this isn't what you want to do in production, but just it is suffices for example, right? And then you can review what your query is, or what your query or your filters are. So you review that. This is all right. You can add some labels if you wanted. Next, and then you determine what is the time between notifications, right? So configure the minimum amount of time between receiving notifications for logs that matches the filter, right? So what's the minimum amount of time between notifications? For hours, we want it to kind of just be quick, so we just make it 5 minutes. And then once a new notification is created based on the alert, right, it will basically create an incident, right? And so you would then need to review that incident, but you can decide to auto close that incident after a certain number of days if you are still not responding to that incident. So for us, because of our testing purpose, we will just say 30 minutes. 30 minutes, just close it. One thing you need to note is that once the incident is created, you need to wait for about like 3 minutes or so before you can close it, because Google Cloud wants to ensure that you are not getting multiple of that same incident within that 3 minutes period, else it will just be too much, right? Maybe you close it and then within that 3 minutes, another one is sent, then you'll be receiving multiple incidents, even though you've just closed one of the same type of error. So we keep the time to 10 minutes. You can keep it to an hour to make sure you are not receiving multiple notifications, but based on your preference, you can choose one and then we select next. Now, this is where you can choose the notification channels. Now, Google Cloud gives you a lot. You can even use the Google Cloud mobile app, right? So Google Cloud allows you to also use their mobile app. You can use Google Chat, Pager, Slack, webhooks, SMS. So you can configure any of these channels as a means to receive notifications. I thought we'll probably find Discord, but I'm not sure. Maybe with Discord, you have to use webhook, or you might have to use maybe PubSub or something like that. But it looks like by default it's Slack that is supported, right? So what we have configured is just email. So it will just be sent to our email. That is all we want for now. If you wanted more, you can configure that. So we have just configured email. So we'll just select our email and say, okay, right? What is happening? Okay. And then we will just save that. Right. So we can then view the alert policy to see its details. Right. So you can see the severity is warning and one notification per 10 minutes. And these are some of the log entries already available for this particular one. So what we are going to do is we are going to try to trigger it and see if we will be sent an email. Right. So we're going to try to trigger it. So we've triggered it a couple of times already. Right. So we should in a few seconds see. Oh, it's triggering a lot. Okay, fine. So in a few seconds, we should start to see an incident over here. So let's go to see on incidents. So we should start to see, this is just an old one. This is an old one. So I can close that one. Yeah. So I can close that one, but I will just come to my mail and I'll just refresh my search. Right. It's taking a bit, but let me see if I actually, yeah, it's chaos, right? And let's run the query once more to see if we are catching the new ones. What is the time now? 39, 39, yeah. So we should be catching the new ones in a bit now. Yeah, refresh. Okay, let's come back here once more and let's see. Let's try to trigger it again. It might take some time. I'm trying to see because it should be reflecting immediately, but I'm not sure if perhaps. Let's refresh the alerting incident. And let's go back. Let's see. Okay, do I have anything in particular? Let me see the incident details because the incident has been striking. Yeah. So this is the service name, the region, and then the component payload is chaos. Yeah. And it's been striking for a while now, but for some reason, let me refresh this from here. Yep. For some reason, I am neither seeing the alert or the incident. That is strange. I'm not sure if I'm making a mistake somewhere here. Let's see something here. I want to see something here. Let me see something here. I just want to see what this means. Find the severity of an alert policy. Okay. Okay. I think that is the issue. I think that is the issue. Yeah. I think that is the issue. Let's see something. I think that is the issue because it's trying to rather, I thought it was more or less like the email that is sent to us or the incident that is going to be created. What um, level do we want to assign to it? But it looks like it's rather it's rather the it's rather trying to filter out the messages or the logs that are coming in, and it will only trigger when it is above that severity. So that means that if I put it on warning, if I put it on warning, then that means that error and critical severities will trigger this particular policy. If I put it on error, then that means that critical severities will track it, kind of like based on priority. But since it is an info and then I put it on warning, then basically I'm not going to get any logs on it. So that was a mistake on my part. Yeah, so that is how it works instead. So you should now see that I've gotten the mail, right? If I click on it, I should now see that, okay, so this is the log that I've been fired, and look at the time, right? And then I can see this is my documentation, that what are the next steps I should take, sleep and do nothing, right? I can click here to view the incident. In the same way, I can also view it from here by going to view or incident. So I can now see that incident recorded here, right? So I can come to see your incident and then I can go to the incident specifically. And now I can see the incident details. Now, if you have enabled Gemini in your Google Cloud project, in my case, I have not, so I don't want to click on this. But if you have enabled Gemini in your Google Cloud project and you understand the cost implications, then just go ahead to click on investigate. And this will then allow you to kind of use Gemini to do investigations on the incident and even give you suggestions as to the solutions that you can think of. In our case, we will just acknowledge this particular incident and later on we can close it. I think for now, if we try to close, it will not work. So we need to wait for around 3 minutes of activity before, we can close the incident. I think that probably if I even trigger it again, I will not get any email because we are still within the minutes that we configured, right? We are still within the minutes that we configured. So we are not going to get another one. But this is generally how you can then set up alerts, to then receive messages about events that are happening, and then you can choose to see any closed ones, and then you can see it right here, right? Right. So this is how you can then be able to have alerts based on certain login events, right? Now, you can even have alerts based on certain other metrics. For now, we just focused on login. Now, I want us to also look at the metrics section. So this is where you can be able to view a couple of metrics about your application, right? So you can see things like the number of requests, the request latencies, which we were trying to use CloudTrace to find out. Um, so even from a broader scope, from CloudTrace, I forgot to show this, but if I move this down here and then I remove my trace ID, right, you should see the trace of all of the requests, right? And then you should be able to identify which ones are low, right? All traces are here, so which ones are low? And you can identify which ones, the deeper ones, had much more spans, so they had much more operations being performed, right? Or say our incidents that were being performed on that particular trace, right? You can see here taking like 5 seconds and stuff like that. So you can from here get a high level overview of what are some of the traces and then go to view the spans to see the various activities or the various actions that were being performed and what was the reason for one of them being high or something like that. But this is a very good chart or a heat map for you to be able to find this out. You can switch this out to a line chart if you wanted, or you can switch it out to the percentile, right? Now let's move on from there and let's come back to our metrics. One thing we want to try to trigger is our CPU utilization. So we want to try to spike our CPU and see what happens. So CPU heavy. So we are just going to try to perform just a few tasks that are just CPU heavy. It's not exactly CPU heavy, but it's just for 5 seconds. It will just continue to kind of like perform some calculation. That is all. So if you check it here, CPU heavy, right? It's just that for 5 seconds, whilst the time is within 5 seconds, it will just go ahead to just be randomly performing this useless calculation, right? It's not really doing anything malicious. CPU heavy. So we can just kind of like refresh these tabs multiple times, right? We can just refresh the tabs multiple times just so we can see that CPU heavy operation. Oh no, I think I forgot myself. Yeah, for that tab, I had not switched to CPU heavy. Yeah, so we'll just trigger it a couple of times, and this should cause our CPU to then spike. And so that is why your metrics tab can also be useful, right? Because you can visit that metrics tab as your, golden tool to then view the metrics on your application. Why is your application maybe responding slow, or why is it responding very fast? You can use the metrics tabs to just find out. And your memory, especially your CPU utilization, you can use the metrics tab to find out. So it might take some time. So that is why I was saying, let's just maybe try to spike it for a bit. It might take some time for you to see the metrics, maybe like a few seconds. So I'll just refresh the page. Right. I'm just trying to spike the CPU to just so that we can just view and see the CPU going high in terms of the utilization. Let's close this. Right. You can also expand this. Should be able to view it in full screen. Right. Can also expand this. So you can mostly just focus on the 95th percentile to see. So you can see here, let's just say last 30 minutes to just keep it in perspective. You can see here that we spiked it around like 40%. I think you can see that some of the data is still not available just yet. It's just around 40%, but you can see that right now the time is 50, but the data is just not available just yet. Let's refresh once more. Let's refresh the page once more to see whether the data is now available. And then let us just expand the container utilization metric. Yeah, right. So you can see that around this time we were spiking around 100%. And now it's still, I'm sure it's still not like finally at what we did in the last few like 30 minutes. It's still going. It's still not fully recorded. Okay, I think it's recorded. Yeah, it's recorded now. But it spiked around like about it's having around like 70% of it in the 95th percentile, right? So this is where you can monitor your CPU utilization, and you can actually go ahead to create metrics based on this. So based on your CPU utilization, you can go ahead to create metrics, right? And you can have something like an alert policy. So you can create an alert policy to basically say that if my CPU utilization, let's say, sees a certain limit during a particular window, so like maybe during 5 minutes, if my CPU utilization exceeds a certain, maybe in the 95th percentile, if it exceeds a certain range, then you want to go ahead to kind of to kind of send out some kind of an alert to say, hey, something is happening, right? So you can configure a trigger for the threshold. So what percentage do you want it to be? And then you can add some conditions, right? And then you can go ahead to then trigger some kind of a notification, right? So these are different ways that you can be able to monitor your application apart from logging. When it comes to monitoring metrics, you can also take each metric and then try to find out by also adding alerts to make sure that you are not missing out on anything, right? Now, the SLOs tab is also a very useful place to go to. What you can do is you can create service level objectives, which is like what kind of performance do you want your application to basically observe or have. So availability basically can mean that, okay, how, like the number of successful requests that this application should have within, a certain period of time. So we can say that, okay, we want the availability within a certain period of time, or let's just say based on the number of requests, or within a certain window, right? So you can say based on the number of requests, you want the availability, you want to set kind of um some kind of what do you call it, some kind of service level, some kind of period. You want to set some kind of a period. So maybe your goal is that you want about 90% of your traffic to be good traffic, right? So you want about 90% of that traffic, right? Which is like around so it's going to look at the number of requests coming in and what is the percentage out of the total that is like good. And the good requests basically are those with 2xx response codes. And the bad ones are those with like 500 range, right? So the total requests are calculated as good requests plus bad requests. That is the total request. And then which percentage of it do you want your application to be able to kind of assume, so that you are like, okay, if 90% of that traffic is good, then I'm fine. Then that means that, my application is performing well, right? So you can define the service level objective. You say continue, and then you create your SLO, right? You can give it some name if you wanted, and now you have that SLO. So now you have a certain error budget that you are able to stay within. So the error budget basically tells you that, okay, um, how much more can you like fail, right? It's just basically like, is the error budget is just basically the room that you have for failure, right? So that means that today, because I set up my SLO to be on a daily basis, right? So I did it not a month. You can also do it by month, right? So you can also do it by month, which means that within a month, you want to have maybe 90% of your request being good, right? I did it day, but you can do it within a month or a week based on the calendar period you want, right? And so now I can say that, okay, so I'm still within my error budget. So that means that around 90 and above percent of my traffic is my requests are, good, right? So I'm still within the error budget. So I still have room to fail. If so, this is where I can now decide that, okay, maybe there is some feature I wanted to push, but I'm not sure, but I still have some error budget, so I can go ahead to push out that feature, right? And then if something happens
right, I can just roll back with my Cloud Run visions and then try to still stay within the error budget that I have. So this is how you can basically be able to, monitor your application, test things out, and then find ways to debug and fix issues. Right. You can also create even an alert, right? An alert for the SLO, right? And then maybe send it to mail or to your Slack channel or something like that. So that is basically some of the few options that you have. There is more, including error reporting. There is more that you can do in the logs, but these are basics that can get you started. Right. So one thing to note is if you want to make it easy for you to query your logs, then use JSON-based logs. You can pass in some trace ID so that you can track the requests coming into your application, and then just use your metrics as a means to track something like your CPU utilization to make sure that you are not exceeding a certain threshold. And you can also set up alerting policies so that you are informed when you exceed those thresholds, right? So I will go ahead to add the application that I just created. So you can just test it out and just use it to play around monitoring. I'll add it to the notes in the description. If there's anything, you can go ahead to share it in the comments. What are your observability findings on Google Cloud? And especially when it comes to Cloud Run, how do you approach being able to monitor your applications and handle logging? Right. Thank you.